It's a huge privilege, really, to be able to be here and together tonight. And I think it's a real privilege for two reasons. The first is that when Ed and I first started talking about this, I got very excited in the way that I do, because back in a year, many years ago, I used to work for Waterstones, and one of the things we did at Waterstones was we did book launches, and so I said, well, we must have a book launch, and we must do it here. So on one hand, there's a passion and excitement for myself because I like book launches, and I was able to sort of talk about how that used to be. And the other is the fact that I think it's really important to celebrate people and their stories and their passions and their endeavours and what they do. And this story, how we've come here all tonight, is about Ed and actually one of his great passions and skills, and the time that he's put into this. I mean, all I've known in my lifetime of Ed is that you've been working towards this point. So to get here with a book that's published is a huge achievement and a huge thing for us to be able to celebrate with you. So for those two reasons, it's a great delight to be able to introduce you to Edward Gleed, who is the author of this book.
Wow, that's absolutely fantastic. What an audience, and thanks so much for coming. Can everybody hear what I'm saying? Because I was trying to get the microphones earlier on. I'd really like to thank Lizzie, and everybody. Also, I would like to thank Jonathan, who's done a fantastic and a phenomenal amount of work on doing the PowerPoint and the microphones and everything. Also Matt, which will be coming around with the microphones as well during the questions and answers. And also for the catering people as well, who've put an awful lot of work in providing the drinks, which of course after the book signing, you're very, very welcome to sort of stay and have a few nibbles. I think what I'll do, I'll kick off with, my passion for railways really started, I suppose, when I was about 4. I was really little. And I lived in a place called Ludlow, which most of you will know is pretty much sort of halfway between Shrewsbury and Hereford. And it was great because we had a main line running at the back, so every time a train came to along the back, I would go up and take the numbers and and what have you. And it was really, really good. We so many long summer days, looking at these trains. It was brilliant. And then of course we moved to Bristol in, would it have been 83, and seeing trains at Temple Meads was something quite special, really, because a lot of the trains that I saw at Bristol, we didn't even see at Ludlow, and it was quite special, the high-speed train. But of course, in those days, you see, the Class 60s weren't built. They were built towards the late 80s, early 90s, and that's when they really came into being. And of course, I started on the railway back in 1986 on what was then, the youth training scheme. And that was then under what was in British Rail, and of course it's all different now, it's all sectorisation. And it's most of you will perhaps know, it's a very, very different railway from what it was all those years ago. But as far as the Class 60 goes, I mean, it's always been a passion of mine, really. These engines are really quite special. They were built actually for, under British Rail, what was actually trainload freight. And they were actually built to replace alien classes of 47s and all the other freight locomotives that had really seen sort of 25 years of punishing service. And they were really beginning to show the rage. But the Class 60 was something quite different. Here was an engine that was designed to build, it was designed to power the heaviest freight trains at British Rail. Ranging from oil trains, aggregate, sand, and it was really, at the time it was cutting edge technology, There were 100 built, and most of them are all over the country, ranging from Scotland down to Cornwall. And we're actually lucky in the Bristol area that the Class 60s are sort of seen on pretty much a daily basis. They will haul passenger traffic, but really they're designed for, like I said, the heaviest freight throughout the network. But somebody asked me a question a little while back with these engines, why, in the British Rail era, it was the blue-grey colours. So why were these engines not coloured in the British Rail blue? Well, the reason for that was that trainload freight wanted to convey a sense of power, and let's have a new livery. And it was, and it was very, very striking, absolutely fantastic. As far as the book goes, and this is why I wanted to write about the 60s, there'd been so much bad press for these locomotives. They were so unreliable and everything. And unfortunately, when people speak about these engines, it's never, you're listening to one person and then to somebody else, and well, who's to say what's right? So I thought, well, let's write the book, tell the story, as it is. So I went to the locomotive works at Loughborough, and it was really interesting to see these locomotives actually in the workshops, going through repair. I think the best way so you can see the 60 in action, I'll ask Jonathan in just one moment to play a short video. Now, the actual video was taken on a small branch near Westerly, which depicts these engines hauling an oil train which comes up from West Wales. When Jonathan plays it, if you would be kind enough to look towards the centre, and I've lost my pen, I should have a laser pen somewhere, but if you look towards the centre, you'll see the locomotive coming into the distance. But I will warn you, it's quite loud. And it is brilliant because the engines are quite bassy. Right? So, here we are. So I tend to take, I take loads and loads of photographs, loads of them. And, I'm always sort of just thinking, do you really need to take another photograph of one of these trains? Now here's a question. Did anybody count how many tanks were on those trains? 30. It's actually 29. And another interesting fact with these oil trains is, roughly speaking, in today's prices, and this is at the pump prices, is probably about £3 million worth of oil. Now that includes kerosene, motor spirit, and diesel. So, yeah. So the video, like I said, I take a lot of photographs, but I don't take a lot of video. And this really was a trial. I mean, I took 2 videos, and that was the better one. So. Yeah, they're 100-ton tankers. And one thing I meant to do was to say to how many litres per tank it is, and I don't know. But I mean, if anybody needs to know, please email me and I'll let you know what it is. But it's an awful lot. It's a massive amount. The train runs, it comes up from Royston in West Wales on pretty much a weekday basis, on some Saturdays, but not on a Sunday. So there's an awful lot of fuel that's going around here. What I would like to do now is to go through 1 or 2 little stories that I've got. Now the first one, and I had to think long and hard about this story, whether to tell you, and I thought, well, what relevance has it got to these engines? But I'll tell it anyway. And this relates to the family, and I will discuss it with Sharon later if needs be. Right, so here we go. It was one October evening, and I was watching a video, and I can't remember what the video was now, but Sharon had said to me, Edward, come and have a look at this cottage. It's really quite nice, and it's a lovely cottage. So I came into the back room and on the computer, and yes, indeed, this cottage was, God, it was really, really nice. But, when you're when you're looking at hiring a cottage, you like to look at, you need to look at the map to see where it is. So I looked at the map, and there was something in my head that was saying Bellamore Lane. Where have I seen that before? And I just couldn't think where it, how it came about. So anyway, we go to the details a bit more, and all of a sudden the penny dropped. I know exactly where that is. This lane is about 2 minutes stone's throw away from the West Coast Main Line. Now the West Coast Main Line runs from London to Glasgow, and it also serves Liverpool and Manchester. So never mind about a train going through every 2 hours, it's pretty much every 2 minutes. So can you imagine going on this lovely holiday with my children as well, thinking, oh gosh, yeah, good one, Dad. That's really, really good. We're supposed to be on a holiday, and you've got a grandstand view of all these trains. So I thought, well, now what am I to do? What am I to do? Do I say nothing about it and hope that when we get on site, as it were, and say, oh, yeah, there's the line over there, Sharon, and the girls. I really didn't know anything about it. Or do I come clean? Well, I thought, well, I better come clean about this, because if they find that I've not said anything, then it's going to be a little bit embarrassing. So, there we are. So, to be honest with you, I can't really remember where we went. I think it was the Peak District. But it did involve taking more pictures of trains. Surprise, surprise. Now, the second story concerns the weather. Now, that's always a photographer's nightmare, the weather. He's got to be, the conditions have to be right to get the good photograph. So the stage is set. Lovely acres of blue sky. Not a cloud in the sky. The children have gone to school. Sharon's gone to work. Now I know the train's running because I've got access to the information from work. Right, so get in the car, drive down the motorway, and still, there's the sun. Not a cloud. Right, this is good. Brilliant. So I'm driving along the motorway, pay the tolls, and there's no delay at the toll, because if there is, potentially I could miss the train, and that has happened. So I get my gear up together, get on site, and would you believe it? Would you believe it? There's one cloud, just one cloud. So I'm stood here like this with a camera, Everything is as it should be. The train comes into the distance. What do you suppose happened with that cloud? Yeah, you're right. It came across, and the shot was pretty much ruined. And it's a real struggle with railway photography. You are so heavily dependent, on on good lighting. I've also got some photographs which I'd quite like to show. There's two photographs. One of them depicts the good, and the other one depicts the bad. So I haven't got my laser pointer, so you'll excuse me with my arm. So this shot was taken, they're both in exactly the same location at a place called Charfield, which is pretty much 10 miles north of Bristol. And you can just about see the sun, which is just there. Now, a few minutes beforehand, it was very much like that. Good, brilliant, and it would have made a stunning shot. But of course, I couldn't use it. And I had considered using actually this one for the book, but I just couldn't, because you can see what's happened. If you would like to compare both photographs, the lighting is completely gone. 2 seconds after that train had gone, the sun had come out and it was absolutely fine. It's always the way, always the way. But the good result, you can see on the left-hand side, perfect. And actually, I was very, very lucky with that photograph because, again, the sun had come out and it had gone behind the cloud, and it was. And I was just thinking, please, please please, clouds, just go away. And it didn't, and it worked out absolutely fine. So, now some people have said, when they've looked, watched me taking photographs, that's a really nice camera, isn't it? I bet the camera takes good photographs. Well, it does, but you've got to know how to use it. You can have the world's best camera, but it's all about composition. And if the composition's wrong, then the shot won't be right. So, it's taking a lot of hours and hours and hours of patience. Sometimes the train is cancelled, and you can spend so much time traveling to these places. And guess what? The train's gone. So you've got to start all over again. Just over here, you'll see a few props that were used. Ladders. Now you might be thinking, what on earth has a ladder got to do with photography? Well, it's actually quite a lot, because there are a lot of areas that, I can't access. So use the ladders to get up trees. It was used to get up a brick wall, to get over the shot, to get over, so just get that shot. And I always remember at one of the locations, and this is a long time before I had this ladder, I had all my kit on, bags, tripod, camera, the lot. And I'm going along, and all of a sudden I see this guy in a tree. And I look at this guy, and he's up here, he's right at the top. So I said, you all right there? Oh yeah, he said, I'm fine. I said, how on earth did you get up there? And he said, well, you just climb. And what he'd done, he'd scaled himself up with his, shins on the bark and all the rest of it. And I thought, there's got to be an easier way. And that's how I came to have that. But it's been, so useful. And on a lot of photographic jaunts, which I've done, going to the line side, sometimes you're well away from the car, 2 miles, 3 miles in some cases, and you've got to take the tripod, and you're actually laden down. And actually the small part is the camera, because that's actually quite small. The tripod weighs a ton, and it's really heavy. And of course, I've put the maps there, because you need to know where the locations are. So there's an awful lot of work involved. Getting the locations, and if you want the good shots, you've got to put the donkey work in, if you'll pardon the expression. The umbrella speaks for itself, of course it does, because Bristol, as you know, when does it not rain in Bristol? It's you do get some nice sticks, some nice days. Now the trekking pole is quite an important piece of equipment. If you're scaling up fells, in northern England and the like, you know, you've got that on, you've got the backpack on and the camera and everything else. You need something to, you know, to support you. So, you know, and that's pretty much, you know, what's involved. There's a lot of work involved, but, you know, if you want the shots, you know, you've got to be prepared to sort of go the extra mile. Thank you for listening, and I would like to now invite people, you know, to ask any questions that you may have. What I will do, I think the easiest way to, Matt's kindly offered to go around with a microphone, so if you'd like to raise your hand, Matt will come around with the microphone and we'll see how we get on. So, thank you very much. You don't need... Yes, Nick? Well, I wasn't quite sure how to play this one, you know, and I thought, well, you know, the last thing I want to do is to upset or offend anybody. And I thought, well, I will put it in, so you know what it is, don't you? You've walked 3 miles in punishing terrain, right? And you've had a really nice breakfast, yeah? And drink as well. Now, one of these photographic jaunts I did was up in York, and you have your bed and breakfast and all the rest of it. I had breakfast, right? And it was an Olympic breakfast at that. It was huge, absolutely huge. And the coffee, well, it was like a bucket, wasn't it? It was like a bucket. So you've had your breakfast and all the rest of it, and that really sets you up for the day. Okay. So you walk to site, and the inevitable happens. What are you going to do? Because there's no loo around, not for miles and miles and miles. Well, I will let you work out what... yeah, and the top is just hand job. But yeah, it's, you know, I'm not going to sort of lie. It has been used, and that's all I'm prepared to say on that matter. So. Any more questions? Yeah, that's a really good question. You see, what's happened? You know, I'm a member of the Model Railway Club at Thornbury, fantastic club, and pretty much on a yearly basis, we go on one of our photographic jaunts, and you know, it could be to Northern England, it could be to the Peak District or wherever. Not a trip goes by without having a pie of some description, and it always gets photographed, and it then just gets put up on the board. So it's been a bit of a long-standing joke with the club, and we haven't done one this year, and I can't remember what happened last year. Did we have one on there? No, I'm not sure if we did. But yeah, I mean, pies are, you know, it's the in thing, you know, because you know, it provides sustenance as well. So, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's. I think one of the first pies we'd had, you know, we'd gone to this lovely place at, where is it called now? Kirby Stephen. And they specialise in pies. And, you know, I was with one of the guys from the railway club. So we go into this place. Beautiful delicatessen. Pies, oh, it was fantastic. And there was one specific pie, it was chicken with ham. And it was absolutely lovely. It really was. So yes, I suppose the chicken and ham pie was really good, really nice. So, yeah. Oh. Yeah, I mean that's a really tough one, that, because you know all of these locations. I have to say that you know the photograph that you can see now is yeah, that would rank as one of the favourites. That was actually taken at a place called Purton. In the far distance, you can see the Cotswold Hills, and if you'll excuse my hand, this here is Sharpness, and you've got all the, you know, the concrete beached barges. Now, this photograph is quite difficult because, you know, it was over a mile away, and that is punishing, you know, conditions. You're running downhill and what have you. I heard the train about a good 5 miles away. Now you can hear these engines as you've listened to the video, so you can hear them from some way off. So I ran down the hill, up the other side, and just as the train came into view, I just managed to spin the camera around and take the shot. And at the end of after I just collapsed in a heap, and I phoned Sharon up to say, I've got the shot, because it's so difficult. You are so governed by, the lighting. And it was one of those really nice photographs that there was not a cloud in the sky. It was absolutely perfect. But yeah, there's been some fantastic shots. The Peak Forest is a lovely place, beautiful rolling hills. It's lovely. And yes, of course, I've been on holiday up there and said to the girls, I hope you don't mind, I just need to get this shot. So of course they're in the car, and just to get a few more shots. But so there's lots of lovely places, but that probably has to rank as one of the best. So yeah, I think as far as the book goes, it's it's important. You can't have just one. Of a book like this, you can't have all black and white and all colour. You've got to have an even spread. Now, a lot of the photographs in black and white were older photographs, which I didn't have. So a lot of them were contributors submitted. So yeah, that's how they were used. I think I certainly think black and white has its place, absolutely, and it's quite important. And with a book like this. Somebody said to me, look, you can't have 250 photographs of just one train. It's not enough. You've really got to go through and look at the whole history of the class, right from day one, and indeed go, to see how they were constructed. So, of course, a lot of people in those days, you see, colour film was really quite expensive, and of course, black and white is, it adds atmosphere, and I think that's really, really important. Really important. Yeah, I think you would really struggle with that, because with these locomotives, you've got to explain sort of pictorial as well as written, and I think that's very, very important to do that. And some people might want to buy the book purely for the technical side, but they're not really bothered about the pictures. On the other hand, it could be the other way around. So when you're writing a book about locomotives, not only have you got to tell the whole story, it has to be written and, photographs as well. So I suppose in direct answer to your question, with a book like this, you've really got to take photographs, and sort of lots of them, and keep them varied. So, yeah. Really what makes the Class 60 so good, and it's, widely liked by drivers, it's their haulage credentials. It's how they can power these trains. The latest version, which is the General Motors Class 66, both locomotives have something which is called, it's a bit like wheel slip control. Okay, now the Class 60 has what they call creep control, whereas the General Motors locomotive has super series control. And it's a very, very clever piece of equipment, as you've just seen on the video, and this train in particular. You're hauling tonnages of pretty much up to 3,000 tons. Now that's okay on a dry rail, but on a wet rail, and that's a completely different ballgame altogether. So if you didn't have wheel slip control, the wheels would spin, and you would really, really be in trouble. So the creep control on the Class 60, it's what it is. You have a microprocessor, and on these engines you have 6 axles. Now, if axle number 2 and number 4 are losing traction, then the microprocessor will automatically reduce the power on the offending axle until such time it regains power or regains traction. Then power is automatically reapplied. So and there's messages going back through this microprocessor, every, is pretty much constant. So the driver actually can sit, in the driving cab, and whilst he's driving the train, he hasn't got to be worrying about, let's shut off power. So the engine will do it itself. It's all microprocessor controlled. But the Class 66 is slightly different. They use a system called super series control, which actually comes in at 4 miles an hour. And it's actually, in some ways, 4 miles an hour is too late. It's got to be done now. So when the driver requires power, he will draw power. But then the wheel slip control, the anti-wheel slip control, has got to kick in right away. Once the wheel starts spinning uncontrollably, then you're really in real trouble. So yes, so really the Class 60, it is really the locomotive of choice for these heavy trains. And there have been some very challenging, workings for these 60s. And I know some of the train operating companies wanted to sort of dispense with their services, but the Class 66 can't quite pull hard enough. And that's why the Class 60s are so good. And, they're widely liked by drivers. So, yeah. Yeah. It became very clear quite early on. I can't just write a book about the various workings, of the 60s, what it does. You've really got to, tell the whole story. Okay, so how do I get the research? Well, I spoke to 1 or 2 magazine editors, and they said, look, you've got to try and find out, to get to the story, you've got to go to the National Archives up in London. And I mean, that was a huge experience, it really was. Now the National Archives, it's a massive place, loads and loads of files. And you can hear a pin drop. It's probably a lot bigger than, the church. So they give you the files, and you have to go through the files and pick out, the salient points. But yeah, I mean, that was one of the really hard things, I think, going to the archives and it wasn't so much looking at the information, it was being able to understand it and put it into words that is easily understandable. And I think that, that's key. There's no point in extracting all this information, putting it in, if people are just going to just glaze over you, So you've got to keep it short, keep it sweet, and But yes, I mean, the archives was very good. It was a lot of work and an awful lot of travelling as well. An awful lot of travelling, but it was a fantastic experience. It really, really was. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because, like I said, these, the locomotives were built for some, the heaviest freight trains on British Rail. And in the very early days, what you see there, this train, you would be struggling really. They used to run pairs of Class 37s. They would do it, but of course, if you have 2 engines, then you're doubling up on manpower. You're doubling up on sort of maintenance, fuel, and everything. So, put a Class 60 on, and it will do it. But yes, absolutely, the 60 was something that was quite special. But yeah, a lot of the older traction was really, really suffering in those days. It was really suffering. But yeah. Right. Okay. I suspect it will be the General Motors Class 66 because they were almost a replacement of the Class 60. And they've already given good service. Oh gosh, when were they introduced? 99. So they are quite a common, diesel electric locomotive. But yeah, I suspect it will be the 66. But it's a different. You see, with writing this book with the Class 60, I had the luxury then, if you like, of going to the National Archives, which provided a wealth of information. But with the 66, it's slightly different because they're still. Well, I was going to say they're still being built. They were being built up until quite recently. The last one came off the production line only about 6 months ago. There were only 100 Class 60, only 100 Class 60s. There are over 500 Class 66s. So the hardest bit is going to be selecting what material to put in. And that's going to be a real challenge. So if I'm here sort of 10 years' time sort of giving this speech with the 66s, well, we'll see what happens, I suppose. Yeah. So. Have I seen them all? No. But pretty much, I've come close to it. Unfortunately, when I started taking photographs of these engines, a lot of them had been put into store, which is a shame, really, because they're really good engines. Some of them are based at Tota now, they're stored unserviceable. As my favourite, it's difficult because there's so many lovely engines. I suppose if I were to have a favourite, it would probably be, the Colas liveried Class 60, which you'll see in the photographs at the back, and it's a really nice, strong, vibrant colour. And the livery on a lot of these locomotives now, it has really come in leaps and bounds from the old. Well, let me put it another way. How many remember the old British Rail blue? It was a really sort of drab, horrible colour. Tony would remember. Yeah, it was horrid. It was lovely when it was ex-works. It was. I think with a lot of today's liveries, they can really sort of mess up the body sides. But the livery here was. That actually depicts a DB Schenker liveried loco. It's now actually DB Cargo of Germany. But it's having sort of done a few years in service, the red is quite bright. It's a really nice livery, even when it's, getting, the exhaust, all over the place. But the Class 60 it's quite a clean locomotive. Yeah, you're going to get sort of weathering, and especially, you see, with these engines on aggregate duty, they go through the stone hoppers, and you're going to get bits of stone going onto the cabs and everything. So they will tarnish, but it's not like it was, years ago. So yeah. Yeah, the Class 60s were constructed between 1989 and 1993, but there was a lot of delays coming in with these 60s because of a lot of the teething troubles. And there's a lot of talk, an awful lot of talk about these locomotives being sort of unreliable, and the infamous 100 faults of these engines. Well, actually, they weren't all faults. They were design errors, and you see. The thing is with British Rail, when they put the Class 60 out to tender, when the tenders came back, it was Brush that won it. They won the tender. But British Rail were quite specific. They said, right, there's the job. Now you've got 30 months to deliver this locomotive, and we want 100 of them delivered. Okay. Halfway through, British Rail then said, okay, well, you've got the design spec. Well, we actually need to change the design spec of these locomotives now. And, it put tremendous pressure on Brush to get these locomotives out. But one thing that made it harder was that, British Rail, they wouldn't allow any more time. So they still had to stick within those 13 months. And that's a massive, it's a tall order. And, it's silly things. And one thing that comes to mind, I was speaking to one of the engineers at Loughborough. Great guy, fantastic, and his knowledge is in depth. But one thing he said to me, the driver's ashtray, okay, it's affixed to the locomotive by a set of 4 bolts. Now the specification for these bolts are wrong. We want them to that specification. Okay, so when you think of, well, it's not just 4 bolts, is it? If you multiply that by 100, because you've got 100 locomotives, that specification has to be put in to the locomotives that have been built and the ones that are still on the production line. So some of you might have seen photographs of the Class 60 in the yard at Loughborough. And they were waiting for the design modifications to be implemented. So yeah. No, I don't think we are, to be honest. Unfortunately, people, they tend to compare us with sort of, countries overseas, but, we have a very modern railway, but, the whole rail industry these days is, you've got to try and run this railway on Victorian infrastructure. Now, a lot of lines, abroad, they've got a blank canvas, as it were, so they can start from fresh. We can't do that. And of course, our loading gauge, which means to say how the locomotive will fit, in a specific area. So you'll see that on the continent, a lot of the trains are huge, and certainly in the States, Australia, the locomotives, gosh, they're absolutely massive. But we can't do that in this country because we're heavily governed by the tunnels which were built in the Victorian times. So, yeah. But the locomotives, the Class 6s were built in Loughborough. Yeah. Was that a yes? Pardon? Was that a yes, we are behind? No, not at all. No, absolutely not. I think we are, it's a highly competitive industry. There's a lot of freight that's being, moved by rail, container traffic, oil traffic. Now, it comes in, the oil that you see in this train here, it comes in from West Wales, and I think you're going to see oil trains for quite a few years to come. But like I said, container traffic, that's on the increase. So yeah, no, I think we're we're quite competitive. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Somebody said to me once, "It's easy for you, isn't it?" Okay, well, why? Well, you work for the railway. Yes. Yeah, I do work for the railway. I can't go on about the running line without permission, because I could potentially lose my job. So a lot of the photographs that, in the locomotive works, I had to get permission from, or if I didn't take them and I had to get people offered photographs, they have to be credited as well. But yes, you can't just turn up anywhere and take photographs. You've got to get the right permissions, and in some cases you have to get permission off the company involved, because a lot of it is commercially sensitive. So you can't just say, "Oh, well, actually, there's a nice shed over there. I'll just nip behind the back door," sort of business. You can't do that. It's all got to be done, and quite rightly so. You can't have people wandering around sort of aimlessly like that, but everything has to be done above board, and that's the only way it has to be. Yeah. No, not at all. And this is something else which I really liked about the Class 60. Some of them were named after hills, peaks, inventors, and those of you that have seen the book and have got access to the internet, you'll see a lot of the names, and they're really quite they're quite lovely. But some of them are very obscure. I'm just trying to think of one or two at the moment. Alexander Graham Bell, for example, everybody knows, what he was, involved with. But some of the hills, you think, goodness me, well, where on earth is? I've never heard of Quinage or something. So, within this book, I've tried to explain as best I can, what the names are, because at the end of the day, if a locomotive is going to receive a name, well, it'd be nice to know what it's about. And I think that, I think it's important that, yes, so I think this one might...
Can we give Edward a round of applause, please? I think it's an amazing achievement, and it's great that Ed's been able to be here tonight. And I know he's got some books at the back, and would be willing to sign them for you if you want to purchase one today, or to make an order for one if you want. There's also a variety of displays and pictures, and there's still some wine and juice and nibbles available. So please do feel free to mingle and mix as that goes on now. Again, thank you, Edward. It's been really, really interesting. Thank you.
Good. Great, thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a pleasure to listen to you all, and I'll see you at the back of the church. Thank you.